Welcome to the Daily Dog. Today is Tuesday, October 6th, and this is episode 41. This is our playoff reactions edition. So we're reacting today to the college football playoffs, which were announced on Tuesday night. The playoffs. This is the playoff poll, the first of the playoff polls that will be announced for this season. The playoff committee waits until this first week of November, when most teams have now played 8 or 9 games on the season, to put out their first rankings. There'll be 5 more rankings on the season as we head to the final rankings, which will determine who is in the college football playoff. Now, here on the Daily Dog all this season, we've been, of course, following Georgia football, talking about Georgia, and one of the constant conversations has been, how is Georgia stack up as a playoff team? Obviously, one of the things that Kirby Smart has done is he's elevated the state of the program to the point now where we're considering where we stand as a championship level team each and every year. And one of the things I've tried to say throughout the season is, we don't want to get lost where we're so focused on championships that it becomes championship or bust, meaning we have no interest in whether or not we win the SEC or whether or not we beat our rivals or have a 10-win season. You know, these are all the historical markers of what makes a college football season great. You know, first and foremost, do you beat your chief rival? A lot of teams would look at the season and say, look, I may not have won a championship, but at least we beat whoever, right? So Michigan, I think last year, obviously they were the defending national champion. They didn't make the playoff last year, but they could turn around and say, hey, but we beat Ohio State for the 4th year in a row. And they went on to win the championship. So I think, I'm not saying that they are completely satisfied. They don't care if they win the Big Ten or the national championship, but I think they were certainly satisfied and enjoyed the fact that in what was a rebuilding season, they were able to take down their rival for the 4th straight time, and they were able to be able to say, hey, look, we beat the national champion. So I think they had a lot of fun with that. So this is what we're talking about, right? Is college football is supposed to be fun. We're supposed to enjoy this. This is our hobby. This is our team. It's our tribe. It's our family. We've talked about that, how we've adopted these teams one way or another, whether you just became a fan, whether you're an alumnus of one of these teams, you went to school there, maybe you got a double degree, like so many Dawg fans now are becoming double dogs, where they have both a graduate degree and a master's degree, an undergraduate and a graduate degree from the university, or maybe you have 2 degrees from the university. So, however you came to be a fan, that's your business. You've decided to be a fan of your team, and you're welcome to be so. It's not more righteous to have been an alumnus versus just picking a team and deciding you're a fan, or just being because, hey, we live in the state of Georgia, so we're going to be a fan of the Georgia Bulldogs. I welcome all the fans, however they come. But that's what makes college football special, right? Is that there's this extra adoption that we have about our teams, especially for those of us who at some level gave and participate. For me, I grew up in the state of Georgia, so I was watching Georgia football before I even went to Georgia. My parents tried to convince me to stay in state, so they started taking me to Georgia games, even though neither of them had any connection to the University of Georgia. They started taking me to Georgia games, knowing that I was a big sports and football fan before I was even college ready. So starting in my sophomore and junior years, we went to games at University of Georgia. So, and so I was paying attention, I was watching, and it was, a big bonus for me as a football fan to look forward and say, hey, one great thing about going to Georgia, if I stay in state, is that I'll at least be going to a school that's a top football school. And then as I came to learn about it, and you hear me talk about this all the time, I came to learn the history. And as a history fan, I was enamored to find out that the University of Georgia has a deep and rich history, both as a university and as a football team. And so I've versed myself in that history, and it's come to be something that I can enjoy beyond just the season that we're in right now. I can look at the history, and that's one of the ways that I can gauge the success of these seasons, is not just did we win the SEC championship, just did we win the national championship, but how does this team How does this team contribute to the overall history of the University of Georgia football team? How did it finish in the top 25? Did it finish in the top 10? Did it finish in the top 5? Did it win the SEC championship? How many weeks did it spend ranked? How many did we get to number 1? These are all interesting considerations, and they add to sort of the history as we look at teams and we say, oh, this team or that team, has spent so many weeks at number 1, won so many national championships, and this, that, and the other. And then the other thing that's fun, as we talked about a lot, is that as a Georgia fan, we have so many rivals, it seems. We're rivals with our neighbors to the west at Auburn. We're rivals with our neighbors to the north in Tennessee. We're rivals to the neighbors sort of to the side and slightly north, not really even north of this, with South Carolina. We, of course, have the big border rivalry with Florida, and we just won for the 5th time against the Florida Gators, and now we've won 8 of the last 9 and 11 of the last 15. And I know I said that yesterday, but I'm just going to keep saying it as often as I can. And again, this is what's so fun about college football, right? Is that it's personal. We take it personally. We have family and friends. We have coworkers and neighbors who, especially here in Atlanta, one of the great things about living in Atlanta, it's such a great college town. There are so many teams from both the SEC and the ACC, just all within a few hours drive of Metro Atlanta. So as you drive around neighborhoods in Metro Atlanta, I've been up in, for instance, I used to work with somebody. I had a manager once upon a time who was lived in Columbus, Ohio. So I used to have to go up there once in a while for meetings. And I drive around in the area up around Columbus, and basically, you see like 10 Ohio State flags and 1 Michigan flag every so often. So you'd have that lone outpost of that Michigan person who had to move down into Ohio, and they stake out their claim with their Michigan flag. But it was, basically very I'm not saying they don't have other teams or other people, but for the most part, the people there are very much locked in on either being Ohio State, and mostly Ohio State for the people there in Ohio, or Michigan fans. Here in Metro Atlanta, we have the ability to have all these rivals because you drive around neighborhoods and you see Florida State flags, you see Florida flags, you see Tennessee flags, Clemson flags. You see, occasionally you might see a bold Georgia Tech fan who actually goes out on a limb and declares themselves as a Tech fan. So it's kind of rare. They try to hide, and they only pop up when they have something to crow about because they don't want to be embarrassed the rest of the time. But they're out there. But we do see, we have there's a right down the street. There's a guy with a Michigan flag. So we have Michigan fans. There's Ohio State fans. There's even on my daily, when I take my dog for a walk, there's even one house that has USC flags, and not USC like South Carolina, USC like Southern Cal. So we've across the street from me, there's Notre Dame flag pops out once in a while. So we've got everybody here. Atlanta is just such a crossroads of the southeastern United States, such a growing city and a place that has brought people from all around the country. So we really have quite the base of college football fans. And then, of course, like I said, the footprint of specifically the ACC and the SEC overlapping so much of Metro Atlanta. So then we have all these schools. So this is what's fun, right? These are the rivalries. But now we're down to brass tacks. So this season is played long. We're 8 or 9 games into the season. We're week 10, 11, whichever it is. I guess actually it's week 11 of the season. And we find that now the College Football Playoff Committee waits to see, towards we get to this last quarter of the season, take a good look at what the teams have done so far, and then they're going to bring us their rankings. So the first edition of the rankings are out now. And so throughout this season, while I have been encouraging us to enjoy the fun of rivalries and enjoy the fun of just a good season, an exciting season, and the Bulldogs have paid off, right? We've had a lot of fun games. It's been a little different than we've used to. We might enjoy dominating some of these games a little bit more, but frankly, most of the games that have been close, yes, look, let's say it this way. I guess we were frustrated. In the end, the Marshall game was not very exciting to start the game. It was sort of ho-hum, 45-7, but it wasn't like it was close. It was 45-7. Now, you might have said, could have been 65-7. And certainly if Georgia the powerful team of the 2022 championship team, for instance, was so good that it was able to beat a playoff team. We may argue about and we're going to talk a little bit about that TCU team as we break down these playoffs, but we may argue how great was TCU as a team, as a real playoff team. But no matter how you look at it, they were a major conference, a team that emerged out of the Big 12, which is a Power Four conference, and they made it to the playoff, and we destroyed them, in the game, 65-7. So I guess that's sort of the frustrations. And you look at a Marshall comes to town, and you start to try to measure this year's team, and you say, hey, if the better of the Georgia teams out there can beat a playoff team 65-7, why aren't we beating Marshall at home, 70-0 or something like that? So, and we talked about that. We've already covered that. There's a lot of different reasons that worked out. But so the Marshall game, but the Austin Peay game was, incredibly frustrating. That's when we all walked away from with a little frustration, because it was only, 28-6 and or 28-7 or whatever the final score was there. And the answer to that was, well, that was very frustrating. Now, of course, it was a game that was interrupted by a weather delay. It was 28-6. It was a game that's interrupted by a weather delay, and there's a lot of different factors involved, but wasn't exactly a beatdown. And that's really all you hope to. That's about all you have to look for, I guess, when you're playing one of those teams, right? Is you want to see you guys rack up a bunch of yards, a bunch of points, look great, because that's what you expect. But in the end, those games were getting started. Gunnar Stockton, was breaking in as a new quarterback and getting used to starting at home and in the SEC and being the starter for the first time. A lot of things we talked about there. So we're just doing a little recap here, though, because where we are, one of the things we're doing is the playoff committee, in a sense, is recapping the season up to now. And they're saying, okay, here's where we are at this point, heading to the final 4 or 5 weeks of the season as we head to the conference championship games and then decide who's in the playoff. Here's what we've got so far. And so we're recapping the season. And from my point of view, I've been trying to say all along, let's enjoy this season. Let's have fun. It's going to be unknown. That's what I said at the beginning of the season. It has been unknown. But as we've rolled through these games, it's been a fun season. It's been some unknowns. But after, I guess my point I was trying to get at is, once you get past Marshall and Austin Peay, not many of these games were games that you would look at and you would just say, oh, well, Georgia ought to win this game 65-0, 38-3. I mean, we could, and we have in the past, and that maybe is some of that power you're looking for as you try to compare this team and decide how excited you are, how much you believe that this is a team that could, raise your excitement and expectation level to the level of thinking championship, right? So that's what you're looking for. That's the whole point, is yes, I'm always going to be excited to be a Bulldog fan. I'm going to watch every game. I'm going to go to the games when I have tickets, or whatever your situation is with attending games versus watching versus listening on the radio versus all of the above. But whatever that situation is, you're going to pay attention. You're going to enjoy. That's why we're here. That's why we're talking Georgia football, is we're rabid Georgia fans. We are Dawg Nation. We're all in on Georgia. But how much do we let ourselves hope? How much do we let ourselves believe, get excited, start taunting the other teams out there, start giving them start planning to say, hey, here we go. We're going to win a championship. How much can you buy into that this year? And this team is giving you some to think about, some to work with, and some to say, I don't know, because we've had some close shaves. But you look at these games: on the road at Tennessee, at home versus Alabama, on the road at Auburn, in the world's largest cocktail party against Florida, at home against Ole Miss. Look, this is a tough schedule. No matter how good this team was, even if this was the 2021 or 2022 team, I don't think you could look at most of these games and say, oh, well, we should have cakewalked all these games. These games should have been 45-3 all the way through, right? I mean, no. I mean, okay, I left out Kentucky, and we did. We did win Kentucky pretty convincingly by 3 scores. That was a game that was never close, 35-14. So, but it has been an exciting season. Yes, it's been a little frustrating to fall behind, but these were good teams. A couple of these teams. Tennessee is still a top 25 team as it sits right now. Ole Miss is a top 10 team as it sits right now. So, the fact that that was a back and forth game or a hotly contested game, or that the Tennessee game was on the road was a hotly contested game, that's not shocking. We should have been able to beat Alabama. We had a team that was at least their equal or better, and we were playing at home this year. So there's a lot of frustration with that. But, it was a close game, and we had our chances. Auburn, it was frustrating to fall behind, but they gave it their best shot. They had the off week. They put everything into it, and they took their punches, and then we punched back and ultimately delivered the knockout blows. And then Florida's not having a great season. They fired their coach. They're on an interim coach, and it's been a while since they've been where they want to go. They have not been an elite team. There have not been hardly even a consistent bowl team, and so it's time to make a change. But they are a talented team. They're still an SEC team. They started the season in the top after winning their Final Four last year and winning their bowl game, finishing 8-5. There was optimism that they would turn the corner this year. And one of the things that people looked at is you look at their overall talent, you look at when they have played on the field, what were the results, what do the stats say? And, people thought they might be a top 15 team to start the season. Didn't work out that way. They've lost a lot of close games, and that's the other thing. They haven't really been blown out of a lot of games. They lost a lot of close games. So it was another close game. It could have been a 2-score game, but it was a 1-score game. But moreover, we won, and it was exciting. So here we are. We've had excitement. We have so far beaten some of our biggest rivals. Many for the umpth time in a row. Tennessee, 9th time in a row. Auburn, I've lost track actually. It was 8th or 9th time in a row. I keep saying that. I should go back and confirm that. Ole Miss, we got some payback from their being able to beat us on at Ole Miss last year and hand us one of our ugliest losses in the last 5 years. And then Florida, 5 in a row against the Gators. So 8 of 9, 11 of the last 15. So for the last 15 years, we have taken care of the Florida-Georgia series. So what do we got left? We got Mississippi State, we got Texas, Charlotte, and Georgia Tech. So there's still some tough games out there. Mississippi State is only 5-4 on the season, but they just won their first SEC conference game in a while. Okay. They were winless in the conference last year, and they were winless in the conference until this year. However, they beat Arizona State, who's a decent Pac-12 team, and they have a winning record on the season, and they played a lot of teams close. They had Texas dead. And frankly, Texas made a nice comeback, but State kind of collapsed on that one. They were down against Arkansas, and they rallied and they won that game. They've been a tough out, and they put a lot of points on the board. So it's not going to be any easy thing to go to. You're not going to look down there and see a top 15 ranking, and you're not going to have the nation give us a ton of credit for going over to Mississippi State and winning. But it's a tough environment. It's going to be loud with those silly cowbells. It's going to be a strange game for our players. It's going to be waking up first thing in the morning and rolling out of bed and playing a game that starts at 11 a.m. our time. 11 a.m. local time, noon our time. So, they played noon games before, so it's not exactly going to freak the team out. Actually, they did well the last time they played a noon game, but it's just, it's going to be a little bit of a tough game. Then you have Texas coming, and Texas has looked. That's what makes these college football seasons interesting too, by the way. I mean, Texas has been, they've been very disappointing. They start off the season as the preseason number 1. They go to Ohio State and they lose, and they only score 1 touchdown. They look pretty bad doing it. Their offense sputters around, and they're not even averaging 30 points a game. They supposedly had a championship level defense, but that defense spent a lot of time on the field. And even Florida, who has barely been able to score, doesn't even average 29 points in a game. They put 29 up against Texas, and they beat Texas 29-21. And that really felt like a low point of the season for Texas. But since then, they've rallied. And all of a sudden now, look, here they are. They're, depending on which poll you're looking at, they're either number 11 or number 13. They're still in contention for the SEC. They're still in contention for the playoff. So, and they have that kind of talent. So that's one of the things you got to kind of remember, as a season is more like a living, breathing organism than it is a static thing. You can't just look at a team and say, well, that's the number 1 team and they're going to be the number 1 team the whole time. Or that's the number 40th team and that's it. They're stuck there. Teams evolve. Arch Manning, people expected a ton from him at Texas, and this is his first year as a starter. And So he takes over the team, and it's been shaky at first, but all of a sudden he's had a couple 300-yard games. He's had a couple 3-touchdown games or 300-yard touchdown games. Offense is suddenly humming. And all of a sudden, I don't have the kind of confidence looking at Texas. You started at the first of the season, you would have looked at the Texas game and said, this is going to be a top 5, maybe undefeated SEC championship matchup. Then Georgia loses to Alabama. Then Texas loses 2 games. Now you look down the road and you say, well, the Texas-Georgia matchup, may not even be much of a great game. And that happened over in the Big Ten, right? Everybody circled the Penn State-Ohio State game coming into this season as this is the big game of the Big Ten this year, because Penn State looked to be finally in a position where they're going to compete for the Big Ten title, and they're going to compete for a national championship, get into the playoff. And they were in the playoff last year. They won their first round game and then lost in the quarterfinals or semifinals, whichever. I think we'll go back. We'll get to that in a minute. But either way, they won a game and they lost a game. But, so this was thought to be the year. They brought a lot of those people back from that team. They put a lot of money into it, and they thought this was the year that that's going to happen. Again, seasons evolve. Didn't work out that way, right? I don't know why it suddenly cratered on Franklin. I don't know if the team just collapsed and lost interest in him. I don't know how a team that was thought to be the number 2 team in the country and a national title contender and a playoff team from the previous year, I don't know how they collapse and become a 3-5 team at this point in the season, having lost 5 in a row. I know now they've lost their quarterback. That was one of the key pieces, was keeping Drew Aller from the NFL, keeping him at school. And so obviously he was hurt, but they'd already lost 3 in a row, or they were in the process of losing 3 in a row when they lost him, and they lost, those key games. So I'm not sure why, these things happen, but seasons do evolve. And one of the things we've been looking at is not just what is Georgia at the start of the season, what is Georgia by the end of the season? And, you've heard that said a lot. Kirby Smart said that. Lots of coaches will tell you that by the time a freshman who maybe had never played a down of college football before gets to the end of one of these seasons where you've played 12 regular season games, maybe a conference championship game, maybe a bowl season, a bowl game or a thing. By the time you played 13, 14, 15 games, you're a veteran. You've been on the field now for 14, 15 games. I mean, even right now, the guys have been on the field for 8 games. They're starting to have an idea of what it means to be a college football player, and they're getting better. I think, we started at the Marshall and Austin Peay games, going back to that, looking at Gunnar Stockton and saying, is this guy worthy of being the starting quarterback at the University of Georgia? Well, now we're kind of all in, because what has he done? He's rallied the team to 500 yards and 40-something points in a win at Tennessee. He rallied the team against Alabama and should have been able to get the win. Just we couldn't quite pull it off. He rallied the team against Auburn, used his legs, dives into the end zone with the Superman touchdown, and we beat Auburn by 2 scores after being down 2 scores. He has a near flawless performance against Ole Miss when we had to be perfect on offense. We needed to score every time we touched the ball to win that game, and we scored every time we touched the ball. And then this last week against Florida, offense was not great. They were spotty. When they were good, they were good. Like I said yesterday, they marched down the field. They had drives of 74, 75, and 82 yards, scored touchdowns, scored 3 out of 4 touchdowns of their 4 scores. 3 of them were touchdowns, so they were pretty efficient. They did a good job in that regard. But the other drives, when they had the ball, they scored 4 out of 12 times. Like we said, we took a knee on that 12th drive at the 1-yard line. Could have scored on that one. So it could have been 5 out of 12. You could count it as that could have been 5 scoring drives. It's effectively a scoring drive when you're able to take a knee and run out the clock, right? So you did the same or better. You sort of even trumped the score. Like in that case, yes, you could have had the points, but taking the knee and running the clock out was even better, because it eliminated any chance for Auburn to touch the ball again. Not Auburn, Florida to touch the ball again and have a chance to do something weird, have something weird happen and win the game. So, but still, 5 out of 12 drives that you would consider highly successful is still not the rate we're looking for. And it would not have done it if that's what we had done against Ole Miss. Against Ole Miss, we had to score 8 out of 8 times to win that game. So the offense sputtered a little bit, but when necessary, the offense kicked it in gear. Down by 3 points, needing at least the field goal to tie. The offense gets the ball after the defense gives them the 4th down stop, goes straight down the field the other way, scores the touchdown, right? And that becomes the game-winning drive. So the offense has consistently, led by Gunnar Stockton, done what it needs to do, and it's grinding out upper third of college football type stats, or at least upper half of college football type stats. So that's kind of where we are right now. So we're evolving, right? What does all this mean? We're evolving. And now we come to these playoff rankings. And all season we've been saying, while we want to have fun, while we want to enjoy ourselves, while we want to consider our rivalries, we want to consider the season, we want to consider how it adds to the greatness and the history of Georgia football. It's not just an exercise in championships. Now, where are we? Well, we're 7-1. We are 5-1 in the SEC. So we're right there at the top of the SEC standings, and we're number 5 in the country, whether you're looking at the AP poll or now with these new college football playoff rankings that are out for the first time, we're number 5 there as well. So that's a prime position relative to playoff. What is a playoff? What does it mean relative to the playoff? Well, 12 teams are going to make the playoff. You're going to have 4 teams that are the top seeds. Those four teams, and we were one of those last year. Those 4 top teams are going to get byes in the playoff. And then the other 8 teams are going to play each other for the right to advance against the 4 teams that are waiting. So again, we were one of those teams last year that was one of those teams waiting. So we got to go straight to the Sugar Bowl. Other teams had home games, home playoff games in December, and that looked like a lot of fun. And we may be one of those teams this year. If the season ended right now, we would be hosting Memphis, who would be the winner of the group of 5. So there's one spot reserved in the playoff for the group of 5 winner, whatever that is. And so let me explain that. If I think most of you know, if you're the rabid Georgia football fan that we all are, you probably know all of these details. But it's good just to go over it, remind ourselves, and just be clear what we're talking about. So you have basically 10 conferences. So you have you still have, so I've even been unclear about this sometimes, or sometimes when I'm talking, I kind of get it all jumbled in my head when I'm trying to make a different point. So let's just lay it out clearly. You have FCS, football, and FBS. So FBS stands for Football Bowl Subdivision. And then FCS stood for Football Championship Subdivision. And so the idea there was they got rid of what used to be 1A and D1 and D2. And so, or I guess it was actually 1A and 1AA or something like that. And then you had Division 2 and Division 3. So there's still Division 2 and Division 3. But the way they divided that and as the championship series was that the division, the 2A teams used to play or have always played a playoff system. And that playoff system is engineered and engineer is the wrong word, I guess, but that it's officiated and run by the NCAA. So they actually get sort of like when we, like if Georgia wins the baseball championship, you get an NCAA trophy, or if you win the basketball national championship, that's sanctioned by the NCAA, that's officiated by the NCAA. So they actually hand out an NCAA championship trophy. In college football, there is no championship for FBS, as we call it, or Football Bowl Subdivision. Teams, the system has been for years that teams go to a bowl game and they become the bowl champion. They get a trophy for being the champion of that bowl game. And then other entities, as we've talked about before, hand out the championships. In years gone by, or for many years since 1936, the AP poll had become sort of the premier gold standard of college football as far as ranking teams and declaring that this team or that team is a championship. There was also the coaches poll, and they handed out a championship. And then there's a number of other things. There's the Football Writers Association of America. They hand out a championship, and a number of other entities. Then, of course, we talked about you formed the BCS. And then we got to the playoff. And so now we have a playoff. We have a playoff committee. And so that's where you get the trophy that we've seen that Georgia has held up twice now in the 2021-2022 seasons with it's sort of football shaped on the top, but it's this gold cylinder-y kind of thing or cone kind of thing that expands from there. That's been the championship trophy. In the BCS era, they featured what they used to call the Sears Trophy at one point and the coaches trophy, but that was the crystal football on the big slab of black marble that you could take the crystal football off. So there's been different trophies and different entities, but the major level or the highest level of college football, the goal is to get to the postseason, and your postseason is a bowl game. So they called it FBS, or Football Bowl Subdivision. And then for the what used to be the 2A group, they want to get into the I think has been a 16-team playoff in that level of football, and that's administered by the NCAA, and they get an NCAA trophy for that. And so that was the championship, football championship subdivision, because they actually play a straight-up championship. Ironically, now Football Bowl Subdivision, or FBS, now plays a playoff championship. So the name has actually become a little out of date. And then you have Division II and Division III football, which are the much smaller levels of football. So there's 134 teams in FBS. I don't know how many teams are in FCS, but you're familiar with a lot of those teams. I think in recent years, teams like the North Dakota State Bison or something like that, and you have the North Dakota and South Dakota. One of them is the Jackrabbits versus the Bison. There's some great mascots and teams in that group of teams, and it's fun to watch the names, at least, of those teams. But here we are. We're part of FCS, 134 teams, and so there's 10 conferences that make up those 134 teams, plus a group of independents. The group of independents has fluctuated over the years, depending on where they were. There used to be up to 5 or 6 of them. In my lifetime, South Carolina was once upon a time an independent. Notre Dame, of course, has been fiercely an independent the whole time. Other teams have been in and out of that. Currently, we have 2 significant independents, or 2 independents in FCS, and that's Notre Dame, of course, is still an independent. And then you have Connecticut. UConn is an independent right now. So you also have a conference that only has 2 teams. You might have been familiar with the former Pac-12 has now become the Pac-2, or well, it's still the Pac-12 actually, but they only have 2 teams. So they are working their way towards bringing back new teams, but right now it's just the 2 teams, and that's Washington State and Oregon State. And hilariously, they're going to play each other in a home and home. So to make up their schedule, they play each other once at their place and once at the away. That's really kind of funny. So, but they are the conference realignment continues to happen in the background, and so there are some teams that are coming to be a part of the expanding and living Pac-12. So the Pac-12 lives on as 2 teams right now, but will be coming back to more teams. So currently we don't count them. So what you'll hear all the time is you'll hear Power 4. Okay, so the Power 4 is of those 10 conferences that make up FBS, of the 10 conferences of which we're a part of FBS, and the Southeastern Conference is one of them. The Power 4 teams or the Power 4 conferences are the SEC, the Big 10, the Big 12, and the ACC. So you'll hear the Power 4. So the playoff works by all 4 of the Power 4 teams. Their champion will get an automatic bid into the playoff. Now, last year, those teams got an automatic top seed, or they were going to be seeded depending on their ranking, 1 through 4, plus the other team that's invited to this party is the winner of the group of 5. So we were talking about right now, with the playoffs standings that have been released, Georgia would play Memphis. Memphis is, we're guessing at this point, the leader of the teams that would emerge as that group of 5 teams. So the group of 5 are the other. So again, 10 conferences right now in FBS. 4 of them are the Power 4 we just talked about. The Pac-12 is just kind of sitting on its own right now as a little 2-team conference, not part of the group of 5 and not part of the Power 4. Once upon a time, it used to be just a few years ago, when the Pac-12 still existed, it was the Power 5. Then it became the Power 4. So Pac-12 is just floating out there with those two teams kind of on its own at the moment. And we'll see what happens as they add teams, whether or not they become worthy of joining. And they would like to get back to being what we would call a Power 5. They may get relegated based on their teams and the quality of the teams that end up in that conference in group of 5, which would then, I guess, become group of 6. At the moment, they're just floating in between. So you have the independents and the Pac-12 that are floating in between. You have the Power 4 of the 10 conferences, which leaves then 5 conferences that are left. And those conferences then make up what we call the group of five. So those conferences are the American Conference, just going through so you guys know them. I have to look them up. I can't tell them off the top of my head. Conference USA, the Mid-American Conference, the Mountain West Conference, the Sun Belt Conference. So those are the ones. Let's see, do we get them all? So the American Conference, the Conference USA, that's 2. The Mid-American Conference, that's 3. The Mountain West Conference, that's 4. And then the Sun Belt Conference, that's 5. Okay, yeah. So right now, the Memphis Tigers, and I'm not really sure actually why the committee has them as the highest ranked. I guess the answer is of the group of 5 conference teams out there. And so these include, you hear like Tulane would be in this group. Memphis is obviously in this group. Army or Navy, if they were to rise up. And, you saw Army in the discussion last year, right towards the end. Army had a really good team, and they were in the discussion for the playoff. Navy seems to be having a good season this year. They're 7-1, 5-1 in the American Conference. So that's what I was trying to say, is I'm not exactly sure. You look at the American Conference, Memphis is 4-1, Navy is 5-1. Memphis is 8-1 overall in the season right now. South Florida was getting a lot of love. So they were a team a lot of people were looking at because they were ranked in the top 25 for a little while. They beat Florida, part of the Billy Napier downfall. They lost at home to South Florida. South Florida was thought to be a pretty good team, and they are a pretty good team. They're 6-2 overall, but they're back out of the top 25 rankings. After losing, I believe, to Memphis. Oh, no, or to UAB, one or the other. I'm not sure. But, just trying to give you a feel for some of the other teams. Conference USA. Conference USA has been in and out of different teams right now, but teams like the Kennesaw State Owls are part of Conference USA right now. And by the way, are having a pretty good season. They're 6-2 and 4-0 in their conference. So Western Kentucky Hilltoppers, Liberty Flames. Those are some teams you probably heard of. The UTEP Miners, New Mexico State Aggies. Those are all part of the Conference USA group. The Mid-American Conference, you have the Ohio Bobcats, the Miami of Ohio Redhawks, the Buffalo Bills, which is funny because there's also the plural Buffalo Bills, Western Michigan, Central Michigan, Toledo. You hear about Toledo from time to time. The Akron Zips, those are part of the Mid-American Conference. The Mountain West these days is San Diego State, Boise State, Fresno State. So again, New Mexico. So some teams that, can make some noise sometimes. Okay, especially Boise State obviously has been a team that gets in and out of the top 25. Air Force is in there, Colorado State, Wyoming. So, and then the Sun Belt Conference is where James Madison has been a good team, and they are again this year. They're 7-1, 5-0 in their conference. Coastal Carolina made a lot of noise for a couple of years. They're in the Sun Belt Conference. They're 4-1 in the conference, 5-3 overall. Marshall, who we've already played, Marshall the Thundering Herd, is part of the Sun Belt Conference, and you might be happy to know or not, they're 4-4 on the season, including their loss to Georgia, 2-2 in their conference. So they're in the upper third of their conference standings, and they're having an okay season after rebuilding their entire roster, like we talked about, to lead into that game. So Austin Peay, going back to that game, Austin Peay is part of FCS, a football championship series, and so they're in a different conference and in that group. So okay, so there's a little rundown of where things stand. So the playoff committee is tasked with figuring out who is going to get the options to be in the playoff, right? Or not the options to be in the playoff. I mean, they're going to be the team that's in the playoff. So the playoff committee is going to, they're going to rank the teams, and then that's going to be, we're going to have 12 teams in the playoff. And so those 12 teams are going to consist of the 5 champions that are awarded spots from the get-go, which are going to be I'm trying to find, sorry, I clicked away from something I had prepared, and now of course I can't find it, but oh yeah, okay, there it is. So they're gonna, sorry for the delay. So they're going to rank the teams, and then from those rankings, we're going to extract the 12 teams that are going to be in the playoff. But it's not just the top 12 teams. The 12 teams are going to be first and foremost those 5 teams. So it's going to be the Power 4 teams, champions. They're guaranteed a seed in the playoff, and then but not a top seed, and that's a difference from last year. And then the group of 5 champion is also the team that's the highest ranked team from that group of 5. And so I guess the idea is Memphis right now does not appear in either the AP They do. They are in the AP top 25 at number 22. The playoff committee did not rank them, Memphis, in their top 25. So, but what they have to do to find that group of 5 team is they go on, even though they only put out a top 25, they actually keep putting down rankings. They keep ranking the next teams at 26, 27, until they get to a place where they have the group of 5, the highest ranked group of 5 teams. So among the playoff committee's top 25, there is not a group of 5 team in the top 25, so they had to keep going. And it wasn't 26, 27, it was actually 29. They went all the way down to 29, and that's where they said, okay, Memphis is the 29th ranked team. And once they hit that, then that's the team that they said, okay, that's the team then that makes the playoffs. So now we can show you what, if it started today, what that playoff grid would look like. Now, Memphis, like I said, in the AP poll is actually number 22. So they might have saved themselves some trouble if they just included Memphis in their top 25, but they had to do a little extra work to go find their group of 5 team. And so that's Memphis. So the difference, again, from last year, though, is the conference champions, including the group of 5 champion, were guaranteed the top 4 slots. And so depending on their ranking. So you took the conference championships, and then they took the ranking. And so, for instance, we were the SEC champion. So as the SEC champion, we ended up as, I believe, the 3 seed. Let me go back and make sure I've got that. I did have that open. So let's see. No, go away. I don't need that. Sorry. So we were the number 2 seed. Right. So as the SEC champion, we were the second ranked team in the playoffs. So we were the number 2 seed, and the number 1 team was also their conference champion. So Oregon won the Big Ten championship last year, a fact that's actually really easy to forget. But they were the Big Ten champion. They were ranked number 1 in the final college football playoff poll. And so they were the number 1 seed. We were the SEC champion. We were ranked number 2 in that final poll. So we were the number 2 seed. So, so Arizona State was the Big 12 champion. They were the number 4 seed. And the number 3 seed was Boise State as the group of 5 champion, and that had to do with their ranking in that playoff standing. So they were able to actually get a 3rd seed out of that. So, and then the ACC champion is the one that got left out of that, right? So as the ACC champion, I don't remember whether that was, I guess that was, who actually won the ACC last year? It was either SMU or Clemson. So, because those were the 2 ACC teams that got it. At this point, I don't actually remember. I think I guess actually Clemson. Yeah, I don't remember. But either way, it was one or the other of those. They were the 11th and 12th ranked teams in that playoff group. So anyway, I'm not doing a great job of explaining that, but the real point was to try and say, so what we've done this year is we've changed. We're not guaranteeing those conference champions those top 4 seeds now based on their ranking. So there's 5 teams to choose from, group of 5 in the Power 4, and and the highest ranked ones were, in order of their ranking, were assigned the 1, 2, 3, 4 seeds, which are the buys. And then if you didn't get that, if you just had one of the at-large spots, then you were seeded according to your ranking at that point. So not one of those top 4 seeds. Well, now this year, we still have 12 teams in the playoff, and there's still going to be 4 buys, top 4 seeds. But the difference will be it'll just be the top 4 teams, regardless of what their conference affiliation is. So it could be if the 4 top teams in the country were the SEC champion, and then the other 3 teams that were all 4 SEC teams, number 1, 2, 3, 4 in the final poll, then 4 SEC teams would be the top 4 seeds. Now, that's probably not going to happen. If it did, it would create a tremendous amount of outrage, but you get the point. I'm making the illustration. So, and this is better. I think everybody feels good about that, because it seemed a little silly. Like Boise State probably, it is arguable whether or not they deserve to be in the playoff. That's a whole different argument, but nobody really thought that if they deserved to be in the playoff, that they deserved to have a bye and be the 3 seed. So that did seem like that was out of whack. So you had teams, same thing. Maybe Arizona State, it's hard to say whether they should have had a bye compared to some of the other teams that had better resumes and were higher ranked teams. But they were given that bye because they were the highest ranked Big 12 champion. So the Big 12 champion was going to get one of those seeds. So again, 4 of those five champions, the Power Four and the Group of Five, the top four seeds were going to go to the teams in ranked order. So I guess I've beaten that one up, so I apologize. So, but this year I think we feel better. It's going to be a freer, more open setup. So what we do have to look at is, again, it's not just the top 12 teams, okay, now that's in the playoff. You've got your rankings 1 through 12, 1 through 15, 1 through 25, and they do put out the 25. But the difference this year is the conference champions are guaranteed a seed. They're guaranteed a seat at the table. They're going to get in the playoff. So, for instance, right now, the ACC's highest ranked team in the current playoff poll is Virginia at number 14. Okay, Miami took another loss last weekend to SMU. They have fallen all the way down to 18 in the playoff poll and 18 in the AP poll. So that's actually the same. Georgia Tech also was top 10. They were up to number 7. They took a big tumble. They lost again to NC State on the road. In the playoff poll, they come in at number 17. They fell from 7 down to 16 in the AP poll. So that's allowed Louisville has jumped up to 14 and 15, but just ahead of them is Virginia, who is having this sort of remarkable season. They kind of jumped on the radar when they beat Florida State. Turns out everybody was beating Florida State now, and the Florida State win against Alabama to start the season is the outlier of all this. But Virginia is having a great season. They're 8-1. They've been the cardiac kids, more so than Georgia even. They pulled out some overtime games. They pulled out some last-second wins, and not necessarily against elite teams, but which is why they're not ranked any higher as the highest-ranked ACC team, and with being an 8-1 team, because they haven't necessarily played the greatest schedule, and they're just kind of eking out wins against that. But nonetheless, they are the highest-ranked team. So as it stands right now, they would be in the bracket. So that you have to, they're not in the top 12. So you got to bump a team out of those top 12 to put Virginia into the playoff. And so that's kind of how that's going to work out. So right now, if the playoff started today, your top 4 seeds would be number 1, Ohio State, who's number 1, number 2, Indiana, number 3, Texas A&M, number 4, Alabama. So again, conference in this version, you got 2 SEC and two Big Ten teams. The top teams in both of those conferences get the top 4 seeds, not the champions. And so then the rest of the seeding goes according to plan. So Georgia at number 5 is the 5 seed. But the one difference is instead of the 12th ranked team in the playoff poll, which would be Oklahoma being the team that Georgia would play, instead, Georgia, like I said, would play Memphis, because Memphis at 29th, according to the college football poll, or at 22nd in the AP poll, Memphis is your top ranked Group of 5 team. So they get the last seed. So Oklahoma gets bumped out of that slot and Memphis gets it. Then you look around and you see, okay, Ole Miss is number 6. They get the 6th seed. And Virginia is where you get now. So here's Virginia. Virginia is outside of the top 12. But again, the number 11 team is right now Texas in the playoff poll. Well, they get bumped out because you have to have that ACC team, at least the one ACC team, get the bid. So you've already given the 12th seed, or the lowest seed, to the Group of 5 team that's outside the top 12. So now you're going to give the other conference championship, the other conference highest ranked team who's outside of that top 12, well, you're going to gift them a spot. So you give them the 11 seed. So they would be Ole Miss versus Virginia. Then after that, now you pretty much just have your rest of your rankings, which is you have Texas Tech and Texas Tech and Oregon in an 8-9 matchup. You have BYU and Notre Dame in a 7-10 matchup. So those would be your first round games. So Georgia would be hosting Memphis at home. Texas Tech would be hosting Oregon at home. Ole Miss would be hosting Virginia at home. And BYU would be hosting Notre Dame at home. And the winners of those games would advance to play those top 4 teams: Ohio State, Alabama, Indiana, and Texas A&M. For our part, the way the bracket is set up right now, as the number 5 seed, if we beat Memphis at home, then we would advance to play Alabama in the quarterfinals, the number 4 seed. So we would get our rematch against Alabama. If we don't get it in the SEC championship game, if the playoff was today, based on the current rankings, we would get that. So that's a long-winded breakdown of the difference between last year and this year. Hopefully that makes it a little clear. Summing up, top four seeds are just the top four seeds. You have to make room for that group of five team. If they're outside of the top 12, you have to make room for any of the Power Four conference teams if they're outside the top 12. So it's so being number 11 or 12 in the poll, just like it was last year in that playoff poll, is a little bit of a precarious position. And so those teams right now are Oklahoma and Texas. Texas is number 11, Oklahoma is number 12. So let's run down that real quick. So again, your playoff poll as it stands right now: Ohio State, Indiana, Texas A&M, Alabama, Georgia. The top five are just like the AP poll. The college playoff poll and the AP poll differ in your next batch. The playoff committee has Ole Miss, BYU, Texas Tech, and Oregon as 6 through 9, whereas the AP poll has Oregon, Ole Miss, BYU, and Texas Tech. So the same four teams, but a little different order. Ole Miss is number 6 in the playoff poll. They're number 7 in the AP poll, whereas Oregon is number 6. BYU and Texas Tech also are kind of switching places in there. So the biggest difference being that AP poll has Oregon at number 6 right now, and the playoff poll has Oregon down at number 9. And then you got both polls have Notre Dame at number 10. Not so sure how I feel about that. Then you have Texas and Oklahoma, Utah and Virginia and Louisville rounding out the top 15 in the playoff poll. In the AP poll, it's Oklahoma, Virginia, Texas, and Louisville, and then Vanderbilt. So the difference there being is the playoff poll has Utah in at number 13, and the AP poll has Utah outside the top 15, has Vanderbilt still holding on at number 15. So those are the teams, that 10 through 15 are the teams that are contending sort of for those last spots in the poll. Like I said, it's a little precarious. If you're number 10, you're in, okay? Because if you can hold on to number 10, the worst that can happen is that two teams that are outside the top 12 will bump the number 11 and 12 teams. And right now, if the playoff was today, that's what would happen. Because again, Memphis has to be elevated up into the playoffs, so you bump one of the teams out of the top 12. And then right now, the ACC does not have a team inside the top 12, so you got to elevate an ACC team into there. You take the highest ranked ACC team, you bump them in there, and you bump them out. So Texas and Oklahoma have a little bit of a fool's gold to look at right now as they stand in the playoff ranking. They have the distinction of being in the top 12. They're in a position that they could be in the playoff, but they need a little help. And oddly enough, they would benefit. Although, again, it's a zero-sum game. So if an ACC team moved up into that top spot, it might keep them forced down. But, what they need or what they want to hope is that somebody in that top 10 above them takes a loss and somebody emerges from the ACC to be, wins a game, looks impressive. Let's say Virginia just stomps through the rest of their schedule and they climb up to number 8. Well, great. Now if they get back into that top 10, they're safely in the poll, and other teams fall back out, and Texas could hang out there at number 11. Then you may still have to bump the number 12 team out of there for that group of 5 team, but the number 11 team would still get in. So there's work to be done there right now. If you're safe at your number 10, you got a chance if you're 11 through 12 as these last 4 or 5 weeks of the season and the conference championships play out. But it's, there's work to be done there. So, all right, that's a long explanation of all that. What do I think about that? I think the rankings are probably pretty fair. I mean, I've been dancing back and forth on Ohio State at number 1. Okay, Ohio State's undefeated. They are the defending national champion. They beat Texas to start the season. Texas has climbed back into the top 11, 13, depending on which poll you're looking at. But they haven't really played anybody else. I mean, Ohio State's resume, they did Washington. Well, I'll say this. I've been watching Ohio State. Ohio State had a great week last week because Ohio State had their resume get a lot better. As of last week, they only had one win. Looking at the AP poll, because there was no college football playoff poll yet, Ohio State had one win against a current AP top 25 team, and that was Texas, and they were number 20. That's all they really had to claim on their resume. Well, Texas has leapt since last week from 20, okay, in the AP poll. They've leapt up to 13 in the AP poll, and they've debuted in the college playoff poll at number 11. So that they're like twice as good looking on paper in 1 week as they were the week before. And then on top of that, Washington, who Ohio State was getting some credit already from a lot of watchers of college football for going out to Washington and beating Washington, a decent Huskies team in their own stadium, and especially because Washington has been a good team offensively, and they held them to 6 points. That game was like 24-6, I think, was the score. So Ohio State's been getting good credit for that Washington win, but it hadn't been a top 25 win until this week. Washington is in the playoff poll at number 23. They're in the AP poll at number 24. So all of a sudden now, Ohio State goes from having one win against a top 20 team to 2 wins against the number 13 and the number 24 team in the playoff poll. So, that's decent. But again, you compare that to Georgia's resume. Georgia has 2 wins against top 25 teams. In fact, Georgia has a win against the current number 7 team in the playoff poll, number 6 team in the playoff poll, number 7 in the AP poll, and a win against the number 23 team in the AP poll, the number 25 team in the playoff poll. So in other words, we got a top 10 win and a top 25 win on our resume. So a little bit better from a what have we accomplished on the field, who have we played, and again, teams don't always get to control that, right? But as far as current rankings, not what they were at the time we played them. Now, you've got to record that. And you got again, going back to my histories thing all the time, right? You got to be able to look at the season and say, well, at the time you played them, you beat Ohio State beat number 1 Texas. So in the history of Ohio State football, it's just another notch on their history belt where how many times have they played and beaten number 1? Well, they got credit for that this season. How many weeks have they been at number 1? Well, they've been number 1 a bunch of weeks so far this season. So they're just logging more history, no matter how this season pans out championship-wise for them. They are adding to their history. But as far as our evaluation of what kind of team are they right now, where are they worthy of the playoff, what do we think about them, I like to look at what are the current rankings, because obviously, again, Florida was a top 15 team. Auburn was a top 25 team at one point in this season. So, to run around and say, well, we beat the former top 15 Florida, I don't think that's the kind of thing we want to hang our hat on. But we can look at it and say, look, we're one of the few teams in the country who has 2 wins over current top 25 playoff teams. In fact, a win over a top 10, top 7 playoff team, in the rankings. So that's an impressive resume. And so, yes, we have a loss. We're in that. We are the second ranked 1-loss team behind Alabama. And our loss is certainly better than theirs. They lost to Florida State. And again, Florida State doesn't even have a winning record at this point, looking like they're on the way to being yet another team going to be looking for a new coach. But and disappointing, based on what everybody thought coming into the season. And certainly you're having raised expectations with that win against Alabama. But that loss for Alabama is looking fluky, and that's not a good loss. Our 1 loss on the season is to Alabama, who is the number 4 team in the country, and we lost by a mere 3 points. So our loss is not that bad. One of the better losses in the country among the teams that have 1 or 2 losses that are in playoff consideration. And our resume, as far as our wins go, really solid. Plus, when you look at metrics, since Auburn and Florida and teams like that are not in the top 25 and don't even have winning records necessarily at this point in the season. But when you look at metrics, like I talked about talent rankings, and there's other metrics, ESPN has the SP Plus rankings, and there's different metrics out there. When you look at that, Auburn and Florida are both top 40 metric teams. So on top of our wins against actual top 25 teams, we also have a couple wins against top 40 teams. We don't exactly have this system yet, but we may start moving to this in college football, where if you think about like college basketball, because there's 300 teams in the top level of college basketball, so many teams, and the top 25 of college basketball is truly elite. You could see that if you were watching Georgia basketball last year. It was hard to crack into the top 25. You can have a 20-win season. You can beat some top-ranked teams. You can make the NCAA tournament and still not sniff a top 25 ranking, because it's just, you're talking about the top 25 of 300. So not that it's nothing to be the top 25 of 134, but it's literally 3 times harder to be the top 25 of 300 than 100 and something, right? So the point being is that, we don't exactly have these quads. So they talk about quad one, quad two wins and losses so they break up basically the rankings. They kind of have a power ranking of all the 300 teams in college basketball. And they say, look, a quad one win is a good win. If you win a game against one of those top 50 or 70 teams, that tells us something about your resume. So I would say that there's some value to that. And I've been working on some sort of a system. I don't have anything quite pulled out yet. So for right now, for comparison and for talking with you guys about it and having this conversation, I'm looking at current top 25. How have you done against teams that you played that are currently ranked in the top 25? And then we can look at some other teams that by metrics, regardless of what their ranking or record is, right now, the metrics say that these are pretty talented teams, that it's a decent thing to beat them. And despite what's happened on the field and both teams having fired their coaches, Auburn and Florida are actually both top 40. So they're upper 1/3 teams as far as the metrics go. So you could look at our resume and say, okay, we've got some good wins there. So going back to what do I think about these rankings? So again, you got Ohio State, Indiana, Texas A&M, Alabama, Georgia. That's your top 5. I think that's pretty straightforward. I mean, Ohio State at number 1, mostly because they're undefeated. They have not been piling it on offense. They're not a lot different than us offensively. They're averaging similar points and yards per game. They are massively different than us on defense. Their defensive numbers right now exceed the 2021 Georgia team. They're giving up single-digit points on the season, and they're holding teams well under 3, in the low 200s or whatever in terms of yardage. So their defensive metrics have just been amazing. Now, again, if you look at those sort of quad tier teams that they're playing, their resume is not that impressive. They played a bunch of, 50 to 80, teams that are somewhere between 40 and 80 or 90 in the power rankings if you put them together among the top 134 teams. So, and they have what has just become, and like I said in the last week, sort of the better resume with Texas jumping back up into the teens and Washington moving into the rankings. When Texas was unranked, you go back 2-3 weeks ago, Texas was still unranked. Ohio State did not have a win against a current top 25 team. So their resume is just kind of there. So on the strength of being, having been the national champion last year, starting off the season in the top 3 this year, having won a big matchup early, having a couple top 25 wins and a top 15 win, and just really impressive defensive numbers, I can live with them at number 1. But I would be just as tempted to put Alabama at number 1. And so I think right now, if I had a vote, I think I'd make Ohio State number 1, and I'd say Alabama's number 2. Now, I would jump, Texas A&M and Indiana, both, who are undefeated, but nobody in the country, I've said this already on a previous podcast, nobody in the country has a better resume than Alabama by what they've accomplished, okay? A lot of this, again, is everybody didn't have the chance to play this schedule, but Alabama has, and this is what they've done. They have wins against current, not at the time they played them, the current number 5, number 15, number 19, and number 23 teams in the AP poll. And to say where those teams are in the playoff ranking, let me see, I'll give you that. Number 5, we're number 5. Vandy is number 16, not 15. Missouri is number 22 instead of 19. These are by comparisons to the AP poll. And Tennessee is 25 instead of 23. But still, basically very similar, right? So they have a win against the top 5 team in the rankings, current rankings. They have 2 wins against teams in the teens and another one in the top 25. 4 wins against top 25 teams. Nobody is even close. So that is by far the best resume. Now they do have the one becoming ugly loss. And so they do have the loss. But as far as what they've accomplished, and overall their statistics are good. So they've been good across the board. So I think based on accomplishment, I can give that number 1 spot to Ohio State based on sort of last year history and where they're going to be. But I think, I have a big part of this that I think you have to earn it on the field each season. And right now, Alabama has earned it on the field as far as wins more than anybody. And think about what this is. This is a playoff poll, right? So this is a 12-team playoff. So you're going to have, Ohio State had to win 4 games last year, not getting a bye and not getting one of those top 4 seeds. They had to win 4 games against other top 12 teams, top 15, top whatever teams. Again, can't just say the top 12, because as of right now, you'd have a team in the playoff that's ranked 29th, and you'd have a team in the playoff that's ranked number 14. So, but at least 10 of 12 teams are going to be top 12 teams in the playoff, right? So and the rest of the teams are going to be somewhere among the top 25 teams in the country, typically. So among those other 2 teams you might get into. It's funny, you just have to qualify it that little bit because of that, the way the system works that we were talking about. So, that's what you have to do. That's what the playoff is it's a tournament. It's a little mini tournament where you're going to have to play 3 or 4 games against elite teams. And so that's what we're really judging here. It's not just a beauty contest. We're not just objectively saying, how does this team look and what do we think about that? It's not an art project. Alabama has proved right now, if any team could be counted on to make it through a 3 or 4 team gauntlet to win a championship, Alabama is the only team that's done that. And they did it in back-to-back weeks too, by the way. Those 4 wins were in back-to-back weeks. So a very impressive feat so far for Alabama. I'd put Texas A&M probably still at number 3. They have a win against number 10, Notre Dame. They have some decent looking wins, even though all of the coaches from these teams were fired. They've beaten Auburn, Florida, and LSU. Their numbers are fantastic, and they're 8-0 on the season. So, and they're a leading SEC team. So they've got some work to do to finish up, but I'd put them there. Indiana, I have railed on Indiana. I railed on them last year, and I started this season knocking Indiana. Excuse me. I'm going to tell you that right now, I'm not a total believer. I'm not saying they're going to win the national championship, but they do seem to have built a quality team. They are here to stay, at least from last season to this season. I don't know about next season. Fernando Mendoza probably goes pro after this season, so they're going to have to find yet again another quarterback. And I don't know anything about the status of their players, if a bunch of those guys are going to stick around and whatnot. But they seem to be a legit team. They went on the road. They beat Oregon. I respect that Oregon may not be the elite of the elite, but Oregon is definitely a legitimate top 10, top 15 team. They went on the road and beat them at their place. And it was a fairly complete performance. They won by 10, could have been more. And they are playing, again, a bunch of teams that are probably like 50 to 90 in the power index. If you looked at them, they have not played, that's all they have. I mean, right now, Indiana's resume is the 1 win against Oregon, which is a very impressive win. So that's one of the better wins on the season, a top 10 win on the road. But that's it. That's their whole resume. The rest of their resume isn't even worth considering. And again, people will tell you, well, they're doing what you're supposed to do. They're going out and dominating games. And yes, Georgia has not always dominated, although we dominated the Kentucky game. Maybe we should have dominated the Auburn game. Maybe we should have dominated some of those other games earlier. So you might say, look, Georgia hasn't been as powerful as they could have been or should have been. Indiana is beating everybody 55-10. That's great. But it is certainly possible that Georgia could also beat a lot of the teams on Indiana's schedule. And that was what was true last year. So Indiana last year didn't play anybody. They made the playoff. They got beat in the first round. They didn't look super competitive. They look like they're probably better and more legitimate this year. So I grant that. And again, I'm giving them credit. I think they're worthy of a top 5 slot at the moment. But I think the idea of them being number 1 or anything, I mean, they still have a very thin resume last year to this year. They still are mostly beating up teams that are, a lesser team. And look, you see it as a quick shout out to the Georgia men's basketball team. They played their second game in 3 days. Yesterday, they played the University of Maryland Eastern Shore, I think was the name of the team, at home last night. And they won by 65 points, 94-29, I think. It was the largest margin of victory in Stegman Coliseum history, as I read it. So shout out to them. Why is that relevant to here? Well, one, it's just good to shout out and talk about the great things that Georgia sports teams are doing. So congratulations to them. But also, here's the point. Like, they beat this team by 65 points. If Georgia went on the road right now, or even at home, played whoever number 1 is right now, they might lose by 20. Okay, that's sort of that comparative nature. I mean, there's just these layers, and so Indiana is definitely a top 25 team. They've definitely built a team that is a top 25 team. And when a top 25 team plays a bunch of middling teams, they should be able to beat them, or they certainly can beat them. And if we had a lot of those teams, I think, on our schedule, I think we would also see. In other words, yes, Auburn just fired their coach, and yes, Auburn has a losing record, or Florida has a losing record and fired their coach. But the power index, the talent index, says those teams are a lot more talented than the teams that Indiana are playing right now. So if we were playing, if we were playing a lot of those teams, we would probably be seeing a lot of easier games. We'd probably see Georgia winning 38-13. A lot of these games say, wow, Georgia looks really great. So there's just so much you can draw from that. So again, the poll has Indiana at number 2. I think I'd put them at number 4. I think we're right where we should be at number 5. I think the second one-loss team, you start to look at the other one-loss teams behind us. Ole Miss, we beat them. Texas Tech, I think Texas Tech is playing well, but they're not playing our schedule. Oregon is a top team. They're a Big Ten team. They're last year's Big Ten champion, but Oregon's resume is like Indiana's, but worse, because they lost the one game against a top team that they played in Indiana. They did go on the road and beat Penn State. At the time, everybody thought that was going to be a big deal. Sadly for Oregon, Penn State's 3-5 on the season right now, and so going on the road and beating Penn State is not something that you're going to get a lot of credit for. Although I would say that if you look at those power indexes that I'm talking about, Penn State is a top 25 team in a power index, even with a 3-5 record. So I think the Penn State win is a nice win for them, but it doesn't show up even as a top 25 win. It doesn't even show up as a win against a winning record. So at the moment, Oregon has no wins against high-level teams to point to, and they just have that they lost the one big matchup that they played. They are 7-1, and they are the defending Big Ten champions. They are playing out of a power conference, so I think it's worthy to be there. So again, you look at that ranking, us at the 5th spot, we are much more accomplished. We beat Ole Miss, although they have Ole Miss's record. Let's see what are they at the moment. We know what they did against us. So Oklahoma, they turned around last week and they beat Oklahoma. That's what I was going to say. And they did beat LSU before they played us. And again, LSU is one of those teams that's a top 40 team, power index wise. Fired their coach, not looking great right now. They lost to us. So they have a win against the current number 11 team or 12 team in the playoff, number 11 in the AP poll, 12 in the playoff ranking in Oklahoma. They have a decent win against LSU. Their one loss was a very close game, a very close game against the number 5 team on the road. That's us. So, but again, you look at that resume, they basically have one top 15 win to hang their hat on. And that's kind of where a lot of these teams are. The funny thing about the top 10, top 15 is when you really try to get down outside of just the record and the bragging and arguing about conference, whose conference is the best, most of the time, teams only play anywhere from 2 to 4 games in a season against teams that will finish the season ranked in the top 25. And so what we would prefer to look at as far as evaluating a playoff team, because that, again, going back to what's the playoff? Well, the playoff's going to pit these teams that are all in the top 10 or 15 or so in the country against each other in this format. So we're trying to say, okay, who's worthy of being in that and who do we think will succeed in that? The goal isn't to predict who's going to win it, but it's going to say, look, what's the point of putting a team in there that has no chance of being a part of that? And that's still one of my arguments about the format. But I think it's reasonable to look at how they've done on the season against other elite teams, other potential playoff teams, and what does that tell us? And so when you run down the list, Ohio State has 2 wins against the current top 25. Alabama has 4. Texas A&M has 1. Indiana has 1. Georgia has 2. Ole Miss has 1. Texas Tech has 2. Has 1. BYU has 1. Virginia has none. Okay, these are all teams that are in the playoff if it started today. Notre Dame has 1 win against a top 25 team and 2 losses against other top 25 teams. Texas actually has 2. So Texas is the first team out right now, the way it's set up. But Texas actually has 2 wins against current top 25 teams, Oklahoma and Vandy. And one of their 2 losses is to number 1 Ohio State. So when you talk about good losses, because I've heard that said a lot when you get to Notre Dame, a lot of people keep saying, well, yeah, Notre Dame has the 2 losses, but look at those losses. It's toughest, schedule. I mean, they had 2 losses on the road against elite teams, and then they've dominated everybody since then. Well, again, they've played nobody since then. Okay. So Notre Dame's record is a collection of nothing. All right. So they lost at Miami by a field goal. They lost at home. I said it was on the road. They lost at home to Texas A&M also by 1 point, or the missed extra point that was famously talked about. Since then, they've hammered Purdue, Arkansas, who fired their coach, Boise State, who's not the Boise State we're used to, NC State, who did just beat Georgia Tech. And then they didn't hammer USC, but they won a 10-point win against USC. And they this last week they played Boston College and they won, but again, they didn't blow them away. It was 25-10. So, so they are, but I mean, again, these are not teams. If we look at this power index, Purdue, Arkansas, Boise State, NC State, Boston College, none of these teams are, top 25, top 30, top 35 teams in terms of power index or rankings. So great. So, I mean, I struggle with this idea of, Notre Dame's really playing great ball and we thought they were going to be elite. Yeah, they lost these 2 near games. Well, they did. Too bad. They lost. The only 2 games, they played 3 games against top 25 teams, and they lost 2 of them. I don't care if they were close. I don't care what they were. I don't hear anybody giving us. I guess this is the Georgia chip on my shoulder. Why are we giving this love? Well, Notre Dame has 2 of the best losses in the country. Well, who's talking about? You talk about best loss. We lost to the number 4 team by 3 points, and we could have won the game. We had a chance to tie or take the lead 3 times in the final 10 minutes of the game against the number 4 team, and it was a 3-point loss. How come nobody's, it's just, oh, well, that was disappointing. Georgia couldn't get it done. Too many close games. That's the narrative you hear. Too many close games. It bit them against Alabama. Well, okay. Where's the best loss, in the country scenario? Where's that talk for us when you say, because that's what I hear about Notre Dame. Oh yeah, well, Notre Dame, deserves to be in the top 10. They deserve to be in the playoff. They lost those 2 games, but boy, those were great losses. And they have 1 win against the top 25 team. That's USC. And it's unclear. From here, one of the things you'd have to do is sort of project out a little bit. We say, okay, USC is a current top 20. They're number 19 in the playoff poll, number 20 in the AP poll. They're 6-2 on the season. I haven't looked at their record, but they're on the verge. I would say they have a pretty good chance of finishing the season as a top 25 team. So at the moment, Notre Dame has 1 win against a team that is in the top 20 and might project to finish in the top 20. That doesn't excite me. The fact that they lost, again, that Miami loss is not looking now. Look, SMU beat Miami. So, Notre Dame, if they're so great, they should have beat Miami, So I don't give them any credit for it. And they have nothing left to prove on their schedule. The games that they have left for Notre Dame, they should win all these games. What's left on their schedule? Navy, Pitt, Syracuse, and Stanford. Now, Pitt's one of those teams that's better than you might think. And Navy is 7-1 in their conference. They're usually not going to hold up against a team like Notre Dame. Notre Dame's wins like 28 in a row against Navy, but Navy is having a good season. So, but there's nothing there to hang your hat on. So I would probably elevate Texas, I guess is what I'm saying, over Notre Dame. I would feel better about Texas, who, despite having looking bad for a lot of the season, look, they have pulled it together. They're looking stronger. And at the moment, Texas has 2 wins against top 15, top 20 teams. So they're one of their 2 losses. One of their losses is to Florida. And yeah, that looks bad because Florida fired their coach and it's not a great loss. But Florida, again, by metrics, is a top 35, top 40 team. So it's not awful losing to a team as talented as Florida. And it was on the road. So they lost to a Florida team on the road, and they lost to Ohio State, who's the number 1 team in the country. So I would put Texas with 2 losses ahead of Notre Dame. Notre Dame's done nothing to impress me. Again, I would feel very confident that we should be able to beat up, Purdue and whoever else they've beaten. I'd be happy if our schedule included those Notre Dame's games instead of ours. And so the idea, well, they had these two tough losses, and they were two of the best losses in the country, and since then they've been playing great football. That's what I hear people say about Notre Dame. Well, yeah, you often look like you're playing great football when you play mediocre teams. So I judge them by the games. Look, they had two top 25 matchups in the beginning of the season. Two teams that are still in the top 25. They lost them. I don't care if it was close or not. Close only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades, as my dad used to say. So, all right. So where does that leave us? So I kind of picked apart some of the rankings. I think the top five make a lot of sense. I think when you start looking at the next batch, it's a little bit of a toss-up. Ole Miss, BYU, Texas Tech, Oregon. Those BYU is undefeated. What's their record? Their record is they have one win of a top 25 team. They've beaten number 17 Utah, who's number 13 in the playoff committee, 17 in the AP. So again, depends on what you look like. BYU has nothing else on their resume so far. So, they're 8-0, but I don't have any problem with Ole Miss, who has beaten a higher ranked team than them. And it does have a loss, but again, a loss on the road to the number 5 team. I can live with the fact that Ole Miss is ahead of BYU, but you could flip the coin. It doesn't matter much. Texas Tech, same thing. Texas Tech is playing out of the Big 12 conference. The Big 12 has some decent teams in there. They lost to Arizona State, who is not looking like Arizona State's not going to repeat. It doesn't look like. They're 6-3 on the season, 4-2 in the conference. So we don't expect them to repeat the playoff success of last year, but they're still a good team. They've had quarterback issues with injury and whatnot, but still, Texas Tech has had a lot of love because they have had their numbers are eye-popping. They're playing great on offense and defense, scoring 40 points, holding people in the teens. They spent a lot of money. And they have some legitimately talented players. People who know football will tell you, look, Texas Tech is a legit team. But again, they don't have anything on the schedule that proves it. Their wins are Arkansas, Pine Bluff, Kent State, Oregon State, who's not any good this year. They did beat Utah, so they do have the win against the top 20 Utah team. They've beaten Houston, Kansas, Arizona. They lost Arizona State. They beat Oklahoma State, who fired Gundy, and they beat Kansas State, who started in the top 25 but has been a disappointment. They're 4-5 on the season. So, I don't know what to make of Texas Tech. I'm okay with them making the playoff field. A Big 12 team needs to, maybe more than one. They seem to legitimately have talent according to, again, the metrics and the eye test and the scouts and the people who look at these things. So I think that we can feel okay about them being in the playoff position for now, but we'll have to see. They got a game coming up against BYU this weekend, and then they close out against UCF and West Virginia. So not a lot of prove-it chances, but we do get the matchup between the number 7 and 8 team in the playoff rankings this week, BYU, Texas Tech. And I'm pretty sure game day is going out for that game because of that being a big matchup. So yeah, I don't really have a big, I don't think the middle of the rankings make much difference to me. So I basically, I'm okay with the top, although I would I'd leave Ohio State at number 1 instead of Indiana at number 2. I'd have Alabama. I'd leave Texas A&M at number 3, and then I'd have Indiana at number 4 and us at number 5. Then after that, I think it's kind of a coin flip between Ole Miss, BYU, Texas Tech, and Oregon. Oregon, again, what I've said about them, they just don't have anything on their resume. I think they're a great team, but they've played one top level team and they lost, and they have nothing else to really show us. Texas Tech, BYU, and Ole Miss all have at least a win against a top 20, top 15 team, depending on who they are. And so I think that's the reason that the playoff rankings have the Oregon behind all of them. And I think that makes sense. And then my big gripe, I think, is Notre Dame. I don't see any reason for Notre Dame to be number 10. I would have Texas in that spot. And then close behind them, I think Oklahoma's not far off. Oklahoma is 7-2. They have wins against current top 25 teams, Michigan and Tennessee. Yeah, those are both bottom of the top 25 teams, and both teams that may not stick in the top 25, depending on how they play out the rest of their season. Michigan still has to play Ohio State, so they're likely to take another loss. Tennessee, I don't remember if Tennessee's already played us. They've already played Alabama. Let's see who they have left on their schedule. New Mexico State, Okay, so Tennessee's off this week, New Mexico State next week, Florida and Vanderbilt. So they could take a loss against either Florida or Vanderbilt. Both teams are good enough to beat Tennessee, especially Vanderbilt. Obviously, they should win the New Mexico State game. So if Tennessee takes a loss in one of those games, depending on how other teams do it, they might not stick in the rankings. I mean, that they already have the 3 losses, so that would put them at a 4th loss. So Tennessee is right on the verge of not remaining a top 25 team, and of course that would affect our resume as much as it affects Oklahoma's, who I was talking about leading into this. So, but as it stands right now, Oklahoma has lost to the number 7 team and the number 13 team for their 2 losses. They have beaten the number 21 and the number 23 team. So Oklahoma, I would also say, has as good or has a better resume than Notre Dame. You know, again, they have 2 good losses, right? Ole Miss and Texas are their 2 losses. And so those are top 15 teams, and they have 2 top 25 wins. Notre Dame has 2 top 15, top 25 losses, 1 to number 3, Texas A&M, and 1 to number 18, Miami. So, the 3 is very elite. But I mean, again, once you talk about who you lost to, I don't know how elite that matters. So Notre Dame is up there, at that 10 spot. And I would swap in Texas or even Oklahoma to that spot. I would push Notre Dame in the first team out batch where Texas is getting bumped out of there because of the Memphis and the Virginia situation. And look, there's nothing to say about the Memphis and Virginia situation except because that's what they are. So I have no reason to rank them or not. They have been gifted those spots, and I call it gifting. I've called it charity in the past, and that's what it is. If you're going to assign a playoff system, and we're going to assign rankings, and we're going to say we're going to take these top 12 teams, but then we're going to make these exceptions. We're going to put teams in that didn't qualify because they played in a conference or whatever, then that's what you're going to get, right? So if you're going to insist on this charity of saying, well, the group of 5 team deserves a guaranteed slot for access. Okay, well, fine. It's a charity slot. This team isn't even in the top 25 in the playoff committee's rankings. They're number 29. Okay, so it's supposed to be the 12 best teams, more or less, is what's supposed to be in the playoff, right? And you're going all the way down to almost the 30th best team in the country to find this team so you can give them a charity spot. And Boise was a much more substantial team last year. They were not competitive. They lost to Penn State. It's a charity spot, and I don't think it matters that much in the grand scheme of things because I doubt that the team at the 12th position is likely most years going to be a team that's going to emerge and win the championship. So again, with 12 teams, I think you got too many teams in here anyway. You already have teams that are not really legitimate national championship contenders. So we're starting to argue about who's on the fringes of that discussion, right? Should it be Memphis because we gave them a gift spot? So I guess that's the counter argument against the charity gift spot for Memphis or whoever the group of 5 team is look, whoever they're bouncing out of that slot that had earned the number 12 ranking probably isn't, the number 12 team probably wasn't going to advance through 4 games and win the national championship anyway. So if we just want it to be, how nice of us that we made it more inclusive and we included teams that otherwise wouldn't be there. I don't think I would be that excited. I don't think I want to be the team. If I'm Memphis, I want to earn my way in there by being the number 12 team, not like go find me outside of the top 25 and put me in there because I was the best team of a bunch of teams that aren't worthy. But that's how we've set up this playoff system. And, I would not do it. I would not guarantee the conference champions. I mean, I go back and forth on that, I will say. So this is the last segment I want to get into is what would I do? What would I do different? What do I think the playoff should be? I'm not sure that, I kind of go back and forth. One thing that's good about guaranteeing the conference champions is it keeps the conference championship game alive. And it does give teams one avenue to control their destiny. Because you don't really know. Look, I think every team has the chance to control your destiny. If you're one of the 134 FCS football team or FBS football teams, okay, go out there and go undefeated. That used to be in the bold and pull era I've talked about before. That was the way you gave yourself your best shot, and it's still the way you give your best shot. Now you don't control it, you don't guarantee it. So the conference champion gives you, because what if 13 teams went undefeated, right? So you could, that's unlikely. We've never seen it before, but it could happen. 13 teams could go undefeated and you could be the 13th team and you could still get left out of the playoffs. So you can't say that you completely control your destiny in that version. In practical reality, you do. If you're ACC, a Big Ten, now again, what do you call it? Florida State would come back and say, "Oh no, don't say ACC. We were 13-0 and we didn't get it." Well, again, stop. I don't care. Okay. I mean, you were exactly what you got. You proved that you were the team that you were left out because you were left out. Okay. Great. You went 13-0 in the regular season. And most of that was done when you had a star quarterback that was and a few other defensive players and some people hurt. But when those people were hurt, especially the quarterback, you were not competitive. Okay. You were not a top 15 team anymore. And you proved it. Right. And then you acted like a bunch of crybabies. You quit and you whined and, oh, it's so hard. We can't be expected to play a game when all of our people, we got left out. We got left out. Okay. I still think we were better than Alabama. Yes, Alabama beat us on the field. We fumbled the ball in our own territory. They got a field goal. They won the game by a field goal. But they go on, they lose to Michigan. We were a dominant team that season in 2023. When you look at the record, I think we were, by the definition of the best four teams, I think we were still one of the best four teams in the country. I think we would have been more competitive against Michigan than Alabama was. That's all just my belief. But look, we got left out too when you define the best four teams, okay? And our team didn't whine and cry. They all showed up and they kicked your ass. Okay. So, and of course, nobody's crying about Florida State now because they've completely embarrassed themselves and they've completely shown that they're a failed program and that whatever they were doing is not working. Okay. They bought out a few they bought a few players. They waltzed through an easy cupcake ACC schedule against a bunch of lightweight teams. And they barely beat them sometimes with a star quarterback. When that guy was hurt, they couldn't beat anybody after that. And the playoff committee left them out because they'd been wasting a spot on them in a 4-team playoff, and they proved it. They weren't mentally tough enough. They quit and they acted like a bunch of whiners, and they were not physically strong enough. They absolutely got manhandled on the field with the team that showed up, okay? And it's hard to imagine that they could have done much better, no matter who showed up, based on what we saw down the stretch. So, again, point being, I wandered into that for a second because I just get sick of hearing about it. Granted, the way they've played and embarrassed themselves as a program the last 2 seasons has taken that whole discussion way off the radar. We don't hear about it much anymore, which is great because I never want to hear that whiny crap again. But you still see it once in a while. I still see somebody, well, Florida State, got dissed, got whatever, unfairly treated. They were not unfairly treated. They were treated very appropriately. The committee got that one right. They didn't deserve to be there. They proved it as a team. They proved it as a program. They're continuing to prove it as a program. They were false. They were fake. They were propped up, and they have shown that they have no mettle, no heart. They're probably going to be looking for a new coach because that kind of thing goes to the character of a coach, I think. Coaches instill that. You see that in the Georgia team. We're not playing with the same kind of talent we used to play with either, but look at the heart and the character and the effort the team plays with. They mirror their coach, and that's something that as a Georgia fan we're certainly proud of. But that little aside done. Let me get back to the key point here. The key point I was getting at was that for the most part, if you are legitimate, undefeated, Power 4 conference champion, then you're going to play your way into the playoff. That's one way you can do it. But that's still not 100%, okay? And the Florida State thing kind of proves that. So the one thing that's good about giving the conference championships a guaranteed seed and not one of those top 4 seeds, that's a good improvement to take that away. But giving them a guaranteed seed, the one thing I will say is good about that is that you have given the top conference teams in the country, the 4 top conferences in the country, they have a way where you can say you control your destiny. You go out and do this and you will be in the playoff, and that's win the conference championship. And so on that level, I think it's good. On a purist point of view, since college football is a ranking system, since these teams don't play each other, I mean, that's the thing. Why do we do these rankings? Well, because you have 134 teams and you have 4 different power conferences, 10 conferences overall, a group of independents. So you've got all these different teams, and there's no way to get a comparative. There's no way to have a balanced schedule or even an unbalanced schedule. The schedules are all over the place. We all play completely different schedules, completely different teams. Even within the conferences, with these big conferences are proving to be not what we hoped they were. The Big Ten conference is too big. One of the problems, again, Ohio State is in one of the two best conferences in the country, Indiana. Neither of these teams are going to play anybody hardly on their schedule until they play each other, if that's the way it goes, in the conference championship game. Well, that's ridiculous. I mean, Ohio State, I give them credit. They scheduled Texas. Texas didn't turn out to be as good as was hoped to be, but by the time it's all said and done, Texas may be a playoff game. So that win went down for a while on Ohio State's resume. Now it's coming back up. But still, outside of their conference schedule is going to produce maybe one win, maybe no wins against top 25 teams. So how does Ohio State play the Big Ten schedule and end up with no wins against the top 25 as a potential? That's just ridiculous, because there's too many teams, because they have 18 teams, and the round robin of teams means, like Indiana last year. Indiana played a Big Ten schedule, came out the other end. They didn't have a win against the top 25 team. They played one top 25 team and lost to Ohio State last year. So it's just the conferences are too big. The SEC, we were 16 teams, which is very big, but the difference is that this year the conference is really good in the middle. I mean, most of the teams are in that top 50, that sort of quad one idea, if it existed in college football, we're talking about. So, at least 10 of the 16 teams are in that quad one area. So it makes it like, well, it's a more legit test on the season. But again, there's no easy direct comparisons. So that's how I feel about the playoff as it stands right now. That's about where I would have it. That gives you my take on it. The other part, I guess I would say, is what would I do differently if I was in charge of the playoff? I just think this was a good time, since I went all into this breakdown and how the playoff's going to go and introducing this playoff segment. Where do we stand in that? I'll wrap up with that in a second. But I guess I'm not a big fan of the 12-team playoff. I'm not a purist. I adopted the 4-team playoff, and I think the 4-team playoff did a good job of preserving the integrity of the regular season. I mean, with the 4-team playoff, you couldn't even guarantee that all of the and see, the 4-team playoff didn't guarantee that conference champions meant anything, right? So the playoff committee is going to look at it and see, and that's how and at that time, for most of that era, it was actually a Power 5, because we still had the Pac-12. So there was almost every year that one of those conference champions was going to get left out. So again, the 4-team playoff had the disadvantage of you couldn't guarantee that winning your championship in your conference gained you anything. But it's not clear that just because you win your conference, it should be. I mean, the ACC this year looks like trash. I mean, there's no, Florida State was supposed to be on the rise again. Miami was supposed to be a dominant team. We were told early on in the season they were dominant. Now they've lost a couple games, and now people are talking about them as a team that can't get it done. Virginia is your top-ranked team. Georgia Tech has been a nice story, but it's clear that no matter how good a story that is, they hadn't really assembled. I mean, on talent, they're playing on heart and gut. They're mirroring their coach. They are impressive in what they're doing, but they're doing it with spit and duct tape and mirrors a little bit, because talent base wise, they're barely a top 50 team. So, so it's not surprising they took a loss. It's going to be hard for them to get through even the ACC schedule, but the ACC is not great, right? So maybe the ACC doesn't deserve to just get an automatic spot in the championship. So I could also live, as much as I've said the good things about giving the value of being able to control your destiny. So I guess I would do one of two things, and I'm not going to settle on one right now. I'd either take it back to an 8-team. The 12-team is too big. By the time you get to 12 teams, you've got 3, 4, 5 teams in here that just have no chance. This is charity. And I don't think there should be any charity, and it just helps devalue the regular season. Right now, and this is part of what this all matters the most as Georgia fans. Why are we talking about this? Where do we fit in the scheme? Well, right now, based on our play on the field, we are legitimately the number 5 team. We are the second best one-loss team. We have a legitimate resume. Our resume is arguably better at this point in the season than Ohio State's. We shouldn't be number 1 necessarily, because we have taken a loss, but that loss was to the number 4 team. So are we as good as previous teams of Georgia teams that were number 3, 4, or 5? No, this is clearly not quite as good a team, but it is evolving, and they're playing with heart. fire, passion, energy. They're finding ways to win. And as much as anything in this era of college football, especially with a playoff where you're going to have to win 3 or 4 games, finding a way to win is what matters. And I've made this comparison before, but last year's Ohio State team left for dead. Okay, they were supposed to be a contender, but they end up losing mid-season to Oregon. No shame there. I think they were on the road at Oregon and they lost. But then they lose an embarrassing loss to just a mediocre Michigan team, where Michigan just manhandled them, just out-physicaled them, and they looked weak. And so that's how they finished the season. They missed the Big Ten championship game. They're not even the Big Ten champion. They make the playoff, but there was a thought they might not. Okay, and there was a lot of momentum, as we've talked about. And you remember that Tennessee, who had a lot of momentum to close out the season, was going to go up to Ohio State, beat them at home because they were so miserably depressed and not really that good, and then begin a run in the playoff themselves. Well, instead, Ohio State pulls it together and just clobbers Tennessee. Then goes to the quarterfinals and just nails Oregon, number 1 Oregon, the team they'd lost to earlier in the year. They beat them by 20 points. So then they have a close escape against Texas. It's a 14-all game in the third or fourth quarter, but they get a touchdown, they get a lead, then they get a fumble return for a touchdown to put a 2-score lead. So they kind of statistically they just kind of got by Texas, but they won by 2 scores. And then they get Notre Dame, who Notre Dame had, credit to them, made it to that point in the championship, but they were a flawed team. They were a very weak offense. They were an incredibly good defense that needed some breaks in games, and they got the breaks against us. They got the turnover and they got the kickoff return against us, and that was the breaks they needed. When they didn't get those breaks, the limitations of their weak offense held them back, and they were really no match for Ohio State. So Ohio State gets up off the dirt, okay, as a team that was on the verge of being left out of the playoff, and a lot of people thought wouldn't make it out of the first round, as a 2-loss team. And we kind of lose sight of that too. We talk about like, oh, wow, because they had this dominant run of 4 games through the playoff. We talk about them as this elite grade all-time team, but they were a 2-loss team, and one of the first 2-loss champions. That's what this new playoff era has done for us, is it's devalued the regular season. In fact, I wanted to make this point. Last year's playoff, when you get to the Final Four, the semifinals, you have Texas, Ohio State, Notre Dame, Penn State. That was your number 5 seed versus your number 8 seed, and your number 6 seed versus your number 7 seed. Texas was 5, Ohio State 8, Penn State 6, Notre Dame 7. In the previous year's playoff, none of those 4 teams would have even made the playoff based on those seedings. So again, this 12 team, there's no way around it. You may think it's exciting. You may buy into the idea that it makes it more interesting for more teams longer in the season. And that is definitely true. If you're going to put a carrot out there and say the carrot is make the playoff, okay? And if coaches now are going to be judged by making the playoff. But let's face it, as a Georgia fan, now that you've gotten the taste of winning back-to-back national championships, now that we were in the national championship game back in 2017-18 season, 2017 season, the 18 championship game, and you were 1 play away from winning the national championship, are you satisfied to just make the playoff now? That's going to be the new thing people are looking at, right? They're going to say, oh, we made the playoff. Well, making the playoff as one of 12 teams is not the same as making the playoff as one of 4 teams, okay? We only made, last year we would have been in the playoff as a 4-team playoff. We were the number 2 seed. So we would have made the playoff. We have yet to get the charity. This year could be the charity. If we lose one of these final games, we end up at 10-2, we don't win the SEC championship, we're going to be outside the top 4. So this will be one of those seasons possibly where we make the playoff and we get the charity of the new season. And that charity can yield a champion. Last year's champion is a team that would not have even made the playoff in the previous 10 years. And that's just something that so you have devalued the regular season. You devalued the conference championships. They didn't win their conference championship. They didn't even play in the game. They didn't play in the game because they lost a second game in the season. And for most of college football's history, 2 losses haven't been enough. There have been a few seasons, there was a 2-loss LSU champion. There's been a few seasons where we looked at, including a Georgia team in 2007, where you say, hey, when you look at the field by comparison, maybe this year is a 2-loss team. is a champion. There's just been a couple seasons that's been true. Well, now we all blithely just anointed how, and part of the reason we accepted that is because we knew how good Ohio State was talent-wise anyway. It wasn't like they were a surprise team that came off the mat from nowhere to win this conference championship. I mean, to win the playoff. So they lived up to what we thought they were at the beginning of the season. It just took the entire season and having a real deflating moment in the last game of the regular season before they sprung to life and stormed through the playoff. But I think that's what you've set up with this playoff too. You may benefit. You may throw Arizona State in here. You may throw Boise State in there. You may throw Memphis. You may even let some of these other teams in. You may even this year let a Georgia team that's really, maybe if we lose one of these last few games and we're 10-2 and then we lose in the playoff, we will probably look back and say we were a good team, one of the 10 or 15 best teams in the country this year, but ultimately not championship worthy. Just weren't quite there. Didn't quite have it on defense. Offense maybe was good enough, but not powerful. They were grind it tough. They were get the yards and get the points, but not just, but that they were not the kind of powerful offense that we'd been in the past. Defense is actually, statistically doing better than last year's defense, but physically and the way it feels on the field, it feels like they really get taken advantage of sometimes. Yes, they turn it around and clamp down, and they can turn it around faster than anybody. I mean, again, Ole Miss game, give up 5 straight touchdowns, and then they go 3 and out, and 5 plays and out, and possession on downs. I mean, just shut the door. I don't know what that is. I don't know if that's, the talent is there and it just hasn't quite all come together yet, and we're slowly building. We're going to have that Ohio State kind of experience where as long as we make it to the playoff, the team can start to peak as we get to the playoff like Ohio State did. I think that's the good news, and that's the measure. That's what I've been saying all season. This is the measure. We don't have to measure ourselves against 2021 and 2022. We just have to measure ourselves against these other playoff teams. And right now, when you look at our resume, as I've talked about, when you look at our position, when you look at the other teams, as we've been through and talked about who they are, what they've done, that's what this whole point of this today has been. Is we've kind of touched on all the teams in the top 10 or 12. And when you hear about them and you look at us, you may have reservations about us, mostly because you know what we were 5 years ago and 3 years ago. But when you look at what we are compared to these other teams, yeah, maybe Ohio State, maybe Indiana, maybe Texas A&M at the moment, although Texas A&M is still a little unproven. I mean, they got the one win against Notre Dame. They have beaten Auburn, Florida, LSU. They did it more impressively than we did. So I'm waiting on A&M, but I give them the possibility. Look, they've got games left against Missouri, South Carolina, Samford, and then Texas to close the season. So Texas A&M is going to have a couple more chances against some legit teams to prove their merit. And then if they manage to stay undefeated or one loss, they'll have a good chance of being one of the teams in the SEC championship game. And so they're going to have their opportunity. Every SEC team that comes through, especially if you make it to and through the SEC championship game, you've proved your merit. We did last year. Again, we sort of flamed out in the playoff, didn't look great against Notre Dame, only put up the 10 points, didn't feel like a vintage Georgia team. But if you look at the season, we went on the road, we beat Texas, we won the SEC championship. We did a lot of things to show that we were worthy up to that point. And I think we're worthy at this point. I think we're in the right spot. I think we're in the right place at number 5. It's definitely not where we've been in the past, but relative to the other teams out there, there's only 1 or 2 other teams out there that right now look like they would dominate or be beyond what we would expect or what we could do. Okay. So, I mean, I'm not saying that that's true, but I'm just saying on paper right now, Ohio State looks like, well, they're scoring 30-something a point, holding people to under 10 points. We're scoring 30-something a game and holding people to under 20 points. It's a big difference. I mean, they look like they would be very tough to beat even on a neutral field. But I wouldn't say impossible. And I doubt that the line would be any more than single digits. I don't know. It'd be interesting to see. We may get to see that. We may get to see it in the playoff. We may get a rematch against Alabama in the playoff. We may get a rematch against Alabama in the SEC championship game. That's another thing. Right now, we are the top 1-loss team in the SEC standings, vying for the SEC championship, but it's going to be a little bit difficult because we don't control, going back to the idea of control our destiny. Texas A&M, Alabama are both undefeated. So Alabama has games remaining against LSU this weekend, Oklahoma Then they get a break against East Illinois before playing Auburn. So they should beat Auburn. They should beat East Illinois. They can certainly beat LSU and Oklahoma. We don't know what LSU will be when they take the field the next time, so it'll be interesting to see. I think that is a team I mentioned before that could have we got rid of our coach that we didn't like, and now we're going to play up to our potential team. So I think that's a potential trap or dangerous game for Alabama this weekend. And Oklahoma is a little bit like Alabama. They're a little bit one-dimensional. They're more about their great defense than they are their offense. But Mateer is a dynamic quarterback, and he's getting better from his hand injury, and so he's got a chance. He's still got a couple weeks till he has to play Alabama, and so we'll see. So I mean, there's some prove it there, and we talked about what Texas A&M's schedule is left. So look, even if we win out, I guess my point is, even if we win out, we could still be behind an undefeated Texas A&M team and a one-loss Alabama team, let's say. And I don't know how the tiebreakers would work out, because we would have one loss and Alabama would have one loss, and they beat us. So, it's hard to say. So, but look, we are in good standing. We are in good company with these teams. All of this has been a long-winded discussion, just going around and looking at it to say, I think you should feel good based on all the conversation we've had here today, that we are legitimately right in the middle of this, okay? We still have a lot of work to do left too, right? We've got as tough a closing schedule as anybody. We have to go and play, sorry about that. We have to go and play Mississippi State on the road, and they're a quad one team, by the way, okay? And the way I'm defining this new quad one idea I'm coming up with. We have to play number 13 Texas at home. We get a break against Charlotte, and then we play a top 25 Georgia Tech team in a neutral site sort of stadium, but it's supposed to be a home game for them, but it should be a good game for us. But those are tough games. You got two more games. We've already got 2 wins against current top 25, 1 top 10 team. We got 1 loss against the number 4 team, and we got 2 more a top 15 and a top 20 team still to play. So by the time it's said and done, if we win all of those games, again, think about that perspective. If we win all those games, we're going to finish the season. And do I think Texas finishes in the top 25? Yes. Do I think Georgia Tech has already done enough? Unless they just collapse from here. If Georgia Tech gets back on the saddle and closes out the season well, even if they lose to us, Georgia Tech's going to finish as a top 25 team. Tennessee may or may not hold on, but I think they can. Ole Miss definitely will. So, by the time we get to the end of the regular season, we have the chance to have an 11-1 record with 4 wins against top 25 teams, current top 25 teams. That's going to be as impressive as anybody. Have we looked great every moment doing it? No. But would anybody look at our team and say, I know how to beat them? I mean, you could put your best. I think that's one thing that'd be really aggravating if I was a coach, is you look at Georgia and you say, look, I can put my best game plan together. I can just nail them in the first half, and there's no guarantee you can hold on and win. They can come back against anybody. So I'm not saying I want to play that way all the time, but I am saying, look, it's an impressive trait. Nobody would want to look at us. And I would love to have another crack at that Alabama game, because I feel like, we were that close. And again, it's not a moral victory, and I'm not saying, we need I'm just saying I feel like we should have won that one. And, look, if we had a rematch, they've been playing really well. They're possibly better than they were when they played us. They've looked really good in several other games, so maybe they would just dust us. I don't know. But I mean, I think that's on the table. I think, a rematch, they could win by 2 or 3 scores. But I think we could also win that game. So I'd love to see the try. I mean, the last couple times we've had rematches, they've worked well for us. So thinking back to the Auburn, when Auburn beat us when we were number 1 in the 2017 season, we turned around and smacked them in the SEC championship game. So I wouldn't mind that chance again, but we don't control our destiny as far as the SEC champion. But I think we're also in a good place because, again, like I said in yesterday's podcast, I don't want to ever just give up on the SEC or say it doesn't matter to me. But at the moment, if the season ended now, I'd be excited about where we are. We'd be outside the SEC championship game. That would be Alabama and Texas A&M, but we would be sitting there with a home December playoff game against Memphis, a very winnable game in which I think we'd have a lot of excitement and enthusiasm, people coming in and saying, this is going to be fun and exciting. It'd be a first ever, playoff game at Sanford Stadium, and I think we'd all enjoy that. I think we'd be expected to win. And then in the current seeding, we would advance to play Alabama, who'd be waiting for us with the bye. So we'd get our rematch there. And then that one would truly be for all the marbles. And you don't have to talk about who's the best team. Whoever wins is going to advance on to the semifinals and have a shot for the national championship. So, look, I don't think there's any team in this field that we can't beat. I don't know how we'd fare against Ohio State. I don't know how we'd fare against Indiana. I don't know what to make of them because I think they are playing legitimately high-level football. But again, we just don't have a ton on their resume to really compare and say, well, in comparative situations, here's where it is. Texas A&M, Alabama, we'll have chances to sort that out. And then we're ahead of the other people. So everybody's got the chance to take another loss. Everybody's got the chance to close this out. We'll see where it goes over the next couple weeks. I think it's very exciting, and I think it's something that, we can start to get our enthusiasm up, despite the fact that we've been a little gun shy because of what we've seen on the field that doesn't remind us of a Georgia championship team. The answer is, as I've kind of been alluding to all season, by comparative nature, where we sit, we are right where we should be. At number 5, we're right in the middle of the playoff field, and that's where we should be based on what we've done so far. So we've still got a lot to do. So do some of these other teams. So we'll see how it all shakes out. But there's a decent chance that if the same level of shakeout happens, we will be in this 5 to 8 position down the stretch, and we'll have a nice shot at the playoff. And then you look at it and you say, what team can we not beat? Which team, if you look at a 3-team or a 4-team playoff and you look at the way we played on the field, who would bet against us in a 3-team or a 4-team playoff? A 3-game or a 4-game playoff. You look at the way you just haven't been able to put us away. We just haven't, you haven't been able to look at it and say, You might look at Ohio State and think they're a better overall team. But if you're Ohio State, would you want to play us? And if you looked at it, you'd say, what do you have to do to put this team away and know that you've got to win? And I think that's a tough thing to know. So, look, I feel really good about it. I'm excited about it. I think we should be excited about it. I think we're right where we ought to be. And I think it's going to be a fun next couple of weeks. So we've got some tough games ahead of us. We'll talk more about those other teams and kind of get into that grid, that matrix of what games are going to matter. We'll talk each week about following the rest of these teams now that we've got it narrowed down to this batch and say, who do they have to play? What's going on? And how's that going to affect the playoff? We'll highlight each of those as we go. And then our next podcast is time to start getting into breaking down Mississippi State, talking about what's going to happen. Okay. So we'll be back tomorrow with tomorrow and Saturday with breakdowns of, who's Mississippi State? What can we expect from them? What do we think we're going to do? What do we need to do? What are the matchups, the true outcomes, the normal way we break these down and come to our predictions about what's going to happen? Again, I'm a little nervous about it. I'm not saying we're going to lose. I'm just saying this will be a tougher game than you might think when you first look at it on paper. So we'll see how it comes together. So listen, have a great Thursday. Look forward to talking to you again on Friday. Glad you're with us, and go Dogs.